Hi, I'm Alicia.
And I'm Robin, and you're listening to Bowel Moments,
the podcast sharing real talk about the realities of IBD. Served on the rocks. This week, we have a really deep conversation with our good friend Derek Dodson. We talked to him about his 40-year path living with Crohn's disease, from dealing with his Crohn's disease before there were any good treatment options, all the way through to how the ramifications of surgeries and treatments have affected other parts of his life. We talked to him about his family history of Crohn's disease, including his daughter Maurie being diagnosed and other family members as well. Maurie's episode is number 58, by the way. We talked to him about his strong Christian faith and how it's been a source of support for both him and for other people living with these diseases. And we talked to him about mental health and how he's found both support and comfort in working with a therapist to help him deal with his Crohn's disease. And we talked to him about how he came up with his motto of make it count and what that has meant for his life. Just a warning that we do discuss suicide in this episode, so it may not be appropriate for some folks. Cheers.
Hey y'all, welcome to Bowel Moments. This is Robin.
Hey guys, this is Alicia, and we are so very excited to be joined by our friend Derek Dodson. Derek, welcome to the show.
Thank y'all for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We are excited to have you, but first question for you, what are you drinking?
Well, I am drinking something that I learned about on this show. Yeah, Alicia, you taught me this drink. I have, for several years, been a fan of a Moscow Mule, and so I'm drinking from a Moscow Mule copper mug, but it's a Mexican Mule.
Hey.
So, yeah, I've learned to really enjoy these.
Well, and
Lovely.
Thank you to Josie McGarva for giving me that recipe, because I'm pretty sure she was the one that brought it up. So yeah, I'm a big fan too. Oddly enough, I'm also drinking a mule because I had ginger beer and I was like, ooh, a mule. I'm drinking what's referred to as a gin mule, which makes it sound like it's just a ton of gin. It's not. It's gin and mint and ginger beer and simple syrup. So it's like that, wow, but with just gin. It's really tasty, like dangerously so. Robin, what about you?
Well, I have 3 beverages in front of me. None of them are alcoholic. 2 of them have caffeine. I have a Coke and a coffee and some water.
Derek, next question for you. Tell us your IBD story. What brings you into our community?
Well, I have been a part of this community longer than many. So I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease in 1984. But at that point, I had already been experiencing symptoms for about 6 months. We actually just figured it out just a few weeks ago that this summer of 23 was the 40th anniversary of when I got sick. And so I have been living with Crohn's for at least 40 years, but I am at about the 39-year point of actual diagnosis. So I am unfortunately a well-seasoned veteran of IBD, and I have been through the ringer with a myriad of troubles with that. I've had 4 small bowel resections. I've had a temporary loop ileostomy, and then probably the kicker for our family and really what got us actively involved with the IBD community was several years ago, actually in 2010, our daughter, who was at that time 11 years old, was also diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And the child life specialist at Cook Children's Hospital in Fort Worth told us about support groups through the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation and the Take Steps Walk events in the area. And so we got involved with the foundation as volunteers. And then I worked for the foundation for many years, managing Take Steps events, and just connected with some of the most amazing people in the country here in Texas and across the entire nation through my work with the foundation, and just have found the most wonderful family in the IBD community.
Well, and we had the pleasure of talking to your daughter as well. So she beat you onto the show. So
That's right.
Definitely go and listen to Maurie Jhaveri. Go listen to her episode because it's a good one. It was really fun to talk to her and how her life is impacted, especially with going into the field of child life in particular, because of her experiences with the child life specialist. So it was really sweet to talk to her. And of course, you got a shout out in that episode. One of the things that we talked about with Lori Plung, who also has had Crohn's disease for a very long time, is just sort of being introduced to the different medication options. Because when you were diagnosed, there really wasn't a lot out there. So when you were diagnosed, what did they say to you?
Well, actually, the first thing they said to me is, you will live with this for the rest of your life. And as a 12-year-old kid, I didn't know what that meant. I mean, the only thing I could wrap my mind around was that it was something like cancer, that it was going to over time slowly kill me. And I remember being pretty traumatized by that realization, but not being able to fully grasp the weight of a lifetime illness as a 12-year-old. And then the very next thing that they said was, we don't know what causes it, and therefore we don't really have great ways of treating it, but we can treat the inflammation. And so that's our best approach at this point. And at the time, there were two medications available. There was prednisone, which is unfortunately still used some today. We lovingly refer to them as the devil's Tic Tacs because while they do have a very decent side, they do work well to reduce inflammation, but they also have a very evil, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde side as well. The side effects of prednisone can be disastrous, especially for an adolescent who's having their own influx of hormone adjustments coming on through puberty. It was a horrible concoction of puberty and prednisone, high doses of prednisone back in the 80s. And then the other medication that was available at that time was zolfidine, sulfur drug. And so the best side effect of that one is it made you look like an Oompa Loompa because your skin literally turned orange because the pills were orange and it was a sulfur-based drug. So it made your skin have an orange hue to it, kind of like some of the fake bake self-tanning products do today, And so I had seasons where I looked a little bit like an Oompa Loompa while I was trying out that zolfidine medication.
Wow.
Great exciting choices for you. Yeah.
So many good choices.
What lovely options available.
So for many years, we being my wife, Carol, and I, we were not engaged with the foundation because we lived in small rural communities that did not have chapter offices or Crohn's and Colitis Foundation presence. And so we just kind of trusted that they were doing the good things in the background, that eventually they would improve research, improve treatments, and find a way to help me feel better. But also, I'm a Gen Xer. And so we came from kind of the mindset of rub some dirt on it and shake it off and just go with it, grit it out, tough it out, and, pull your big boy pants on and just go. And so most of my life, my early life with Crohn's into young adulthood and even middle age, I just kind of did my own thing. I didn't necessarily feel like I needed to lean on the foundation. But when Maurie was diagnosed, she, of course, had the advantage of having a parent who knew what the disease was, knew what it was like to live with it. And so she didn't come into this like many new patients who are caught like a deer in the headlights and this overwhelming diagnosis, coming out of left field, that they had no prior knowledge, no family history. And so they're just searching for answers. And unfortunately, many of them go to Dr. Google and find some horror stories before they find the truth. So Maurie had the advantage of having that prior knowledge of someone living with Crohn's disease. But what we decided through the encouragement of the child life specialist at Cook Children's was that she needed to have her own disease experience and support apart from her father. And so we sought engagement with the foundation in order to have her find an outlet for connection and peer group outside of her family. She knew from the beginning that she was going to have support of her dad. And we have had an incredible bond as father and daughter for these unfortunate 13 years that she has lived with this. And we will always have that connection, that bond between us. She considers me her hero and I consider her my hero. And we kind of feed off of one another. We commiserate together on a lot of things. But she needed a support system that was like her. And so we got her involved with pediatric support groups and with Camp Oasis. And she still is in touch with girls that she met at her very first Camp Oasis all those many years ago. And now some of them are in college, and some of them are graduates of college and on to master's degrees and other things. And they are still in touch with one another thanks to technology. And so it was literally her new family. And she just broadened her circle, and she has weathered the early years of IBD so much better than I did because of those connections. When I was diagnosed, we lived in a small town in East Texas, county seat town near the Louisiana line. And I actually had to go across the state line into Shreveport, Louisiana to seek GI care. And it wasn't even a pediatric doctor. The closest pediatric doctor was in Dallas, but that was in a time in the 80s when people didn't do a lot of far driving outside of their community. And so we chose to find kind of the closest GI, and that was in Shreveport, which was about an hour and 15 minutes away. And so I didn't even meet anyone else with Crohn's disease until I was well into my 20s. And so I lived with the disease for, more than 10 or 15 years before I face-to-face met another patient. And so I lived with the reality, maybe even a false reality, that I thought I was alone. And that shaped a lot of who I was as a patient and the traumas that I endured, because I literally faced this disease on my own with no help other than family encouragement and an adult doctor, even though I was still a kid.
That's a good point. So we've had several college age guests on the show. And for the 20 listeners who are still in college, this is going to come as a shock to you. But it was a time before the internet. And everyone on this show right now that's recording was alive before the internet. Yep. And I lived in a rural community also growing up. I did not get diagnosed until I was 25, but the internet was still in its infancy then. So it was not as organized, and information was not as available, as easy at that point. Google was not what it is now. So if you wanted information, like if you wanted to find out about the foundation, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, it was around. It just celebrated 50 something years, but you had to go to a library, check out a resource, call a phone number, and they had to mail you a brochure. It wasn't like downloading something, it wasn't like downloading something from the internet. And so getting information, finding a support group, making a connection was not as easy as it is today. And so finding a doctor, finding a specialist, having access, while it is not perfect now, is, just light years. Mm-hmm. In our lifetime, just light years ahead of, not even just in our lifetime, just in 40 years from when you were a child to now, from when I was 25 to now. It's just light years ahead of where it was from there to now, to have access to information, to care. We still have a long way to go, but it has come a very long way in just a couple of decades.
Absolutely.
You bring up a really good point though, Robin. So Derek, what did you do when you were diagnosed? Did you go to the library and check out a book? What did your parents do to get information?
So that's a great question, Alicia. Thank you for asking. So they became what we called back then card-carrying members of the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of America. They paid their annual membership dues, and they got a newsletter. I don't remember if it was monthly or quarterly. Honestly, as a kid, I didn't care because I just wanted to feel better. I just wanted to play backyard football. I wanted to play Little League. I wanted to be a Boy Scout. I wanted to do all the things that boys do as preteens and adolescents. And I wanted to be perceived as normal as possible. In fact, I hid my disease from most people in my immediate circle and in my community. And so I wasn't interested in what the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation had to do at all. But my parents were very interested. They immersed themselves in every bit of information that they could find at the time. But you're right, Robin, it was very difficult to access information about that at the time because it was limited in existence. But then we were also in a rural community that just didn't have access to a lot of that information. So one of the first things we did once we kind kind of learned what my diagnosis was and, some of the preliminary and foundational information about it, my parents kind of got the mindset that, hey, let's find the best out there and get Derek the best help that is around. And so they asked around and they got some information about Mayo Clinic. They learned about Sinai in New York. And, again, like I was talking earlier about travel limitations back then, it wasn't feasible for us to go to either of those clinics. And so we did learn that Children's Hospital in Dallas at the time did have some IBD pediatricians. And so that was, kind of in our backyard, at least in it was down the street. It was a 3+ hour drive to get to Dallas back then. And so we went to Children's in Dallas, and that's actually where I was actually diagnosed, was through a IBD pediatrician there. And interestingly enough, Maurie, when she was doing her internship for her procedures that she needs to do to become a child life specialist, she did an internship at Dallas Children's Hospital where I was diagnosed. And that was pretty awesome for me because that was where it all started for me. She didn't have much connection to the IBD floor, but she did have a great experience at Dallas Children's and through the child life department there.
I was waiting for you to say, and she met the doctor that diagnosed me. And I'm like,
no,
I was like, he's the oldest thing ever.
Yeah. That would have been a movie moment and maybe a little bit like, why haven't you retired yet? Yes.
I was like, they just wheel him out. He's some sort of like reanimated corpse. I'm sorry, Derek. It wasn't that long ago.
It wasn't that long ago. No.
Just in my head, that's what's happening. Listen, let's rate this movie. Okay,
right.
Sorry. Go ahead.
That's most of it, so we accessed the resources that we had available at that time, and there wasn't a lot, so we just simply found what we could. I know that my parents did, find some other people, like friends of friends and, just people within their network that had family members or even were patients, who had Crohn's disease. And so they just, they tried to absorb as much information as they could. But I mean, let's be real, compared to what we know now about the disease through advanced research and modern research, very little was known about it back then. I mean, there wasn't a lot to know. And most of it at the time was symptom management. That was at least the bulk of the course of treatment. We didn't have any or very little knowledge that it was autoimmune in nature. And so that's why the therapies were prednisone and azolfidine, because both of those were anti-inflammatories. And so that's where we were kind of forced to go because that was all that was around to help with that.
Isn't that crazy to think about now when we have so many more treatment options? So I'm really curious because especially since your daughter has been diagnosed, and your daughter was diagnosed like also at the same age, wasn't she? Wasn't Maurie also
roughly the same stage of life, right around kind of that pre-adolescent age. And her pediatrician, which I'll give a shout out to Dr. Bancoli Ocean Token at Cook Children's in Fort Worth. He was amazing with the level of care, and everyone at Cook's was. He told us very quickly that was pure coincidence, that there was no genetic connection to that presentation timing. It just happened that way. There was nothing that necessarily, to our knowledge of the disease, that could have triggered that at the same time. It was pure coincidence.
So your parents, when you were diagnosed, didn't look back and be like, oh, that's why Aunt Marge was in the bathroom all the time, or they didn't look back and find other family members?
So we did have a familial tie to IBD. I have a grandfather who has passed away. My mother's father had ileitis, which we now know is one of the forms of Crohn's disease. And that term kind of refers to the fact that the disease activity is in the ileum. And so, we knew that my grandfather had that, but I had never heard the term Crohn's disease before. It was ileitis that we had heard him talk about. And I knew that he, from time to time, was sick and that he had to go to the hospital and drink some nasty stuff called barium. And I got myself as a young man very closely acquainted with barium. And I can say that the technologies of barium alone have come light years over 40 years. When I first had to drink barium as a 12-year-old kid, it was as thick as castor oil. I mean, it was hard to swallow, and there was no flavoring to it. It had a bitter medicinal taste. You just had to hold your nose and chug it. I mean, it was rough, and I came close to throwing up so many times, and I don't think I ever drank enough of what they wanted me to. They just kind of said, okay, let's see if it was enough to work on the imaging. And fortunately, I did probably the bare minimum just to get it to pass through my entire GI tract for the imaging. And so with my grandfather having that previous connection, there was some knowledge and understanding about GI issues in our family. But if there was discussion among our family about the connection of my disease to his, I was not in that conversation. There may have been, and I probably need to ask my parents about that. But I quite likely buried my head in the sand and just kind of, like I said, I just wanted to be a normal kid. I just wanted to live a normal life and do normal teenager things.
We're kind of that generation too, where like you don't talk about the stuff with your kids. Like,
exactly.
Parents were not open with that information. Like you're seen and not heard, and you're not part of conversations that you don't need to know.
Yeah. I really never heard my grandfather talk about his illness. I mean, I heard my grandmother talking some about him being sick and him having symptoms and him having trips to the hospital. And I think my parents also would tell me, hey, granddad's going to have some tests done at the hospital here and there. But you're right. It was not talked about. That generation did not talk about illness. They were not open. They just kind of dealt with all that privately. And I mean, it is what it is. I mean, that's just how they were raised, and that's how culture was back then. And so, that component didn't necessarily provide a solid foundation for me because of those factors. It was kind of behind the scenes.
Fun fact about barium, real quick. I had to do it with an ostomy, and I think the x-ray tech forgot that I had an ostomy, and I had to knock, knock, knock. Excuse me, are you going to take these x-rays soon? Because my ostomy bag is about to
explode.
They're like, oh my gosh. I said, I have to empty this within the next few minutes. And they're like, well, we have to take the x-rays before you empty it. I'm like, the barium has already exited my body. So it's not like, yeah, awesome.
Did they make you drink more barium?
No, they did not. Fortunately, it worked out okay. Because I did not have a colon, the next time I had to drink barium, before I started drinking the barium, I was like, I need to talk to
the tech
at the reception when they handed me the bottles. Like, I need to talk to whoever is taking these pictures. And they're like, they went and got them. I said, I don't have a colon. So however long this usually takes for people with colons, subtract the colon time for me.
Wow.
So however long that is, make sure that you bump me up in your schedule, because otherwise this will have exited my body. And they're like, good to know. Note for people without a colon on this show. If you have a J pouch or an ostomy or something like that, and you have to drink barium for tests, make sure that the person who is taking the imaging knows that you don't have a colon. I have a question. So for as long as I've known you, this is really important to you, and you add it to a lot when you're doing personal fundraising, or I know that when if you have to have any tests, or I remember when you had to have surgery, like it was something that you posted about a lot, and it's this idea of make it count. And I know that people know you will immediately know what that means. And I'm actually kind of tearing up just saying that. So would you talk about this idea of make it count, what it means to you, and why it's so important?
Okay, sure. Yeah. Thank you for asking that. Make it count kind of started when I was a sophomore in high school. And at that point in my life, I was pretty sick with Crohn's. I was on high doses of prednisone. And one of the more fun side effects of prednisone is what is commonly referred to as moon face. And so I had a very chubby looking face in my school yearbook photo for that year because I was on, I believe it was like 80 or 60 milligrams of prednisone. And so I was, and strangely enough, it didn't necessarily mean that you put on a lot of extra weight necessarily, but you just kind of retained that fluid in your body. And so you looked chubby. And so I had that going on. I was, of course, dealing with, all sorts of teenage issues. I mean, guys in the 80s could be pretty brutal. I won't name names, but there were some locker room guys that were not too kind to this person. And so I kind of came to a point to where I was just sick of being sick. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so I made a decision that I was done. And I wrote a letter to my parents saying goodbye. And after they had gone to sleep one night, I went down the hall and slipped that letter underneath their door to their bedroom. And I went back to my bedroom fully planning to end my life that night. And I can remember sitting there in my bedroom, and it wasn't the first time I'd had this conversation with God, but I can remember shaking my fist through the ceiling toward God and saying, "Why did you do this to me? Why did you make me a mistake? Why did you choose to let all of this horrible stuff happen to me?" And I was mentally and physically exhausted, and I didn't want to live anymore. And I argued with God long enough that my parents read that letter, and my dad came down the hall and knocked on my door and effectively saved my life. I don't know if I actually would have gone through with it, but it was a tipping point for me, for sure. I had had enough. And for all of those years, kind of the lead up to that was that I would just continually pray, God, make it stop, make it go away. Now, fast forward to probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And I was reading a blog and, kind of scrolling through social media, and I saw a blog post and the caption, kind of the headline on the blog caught my eye. It said, "Change the way that you pray with one word," or something to that effect. It was changing with one word. And so I clicked on that link and I started reading this blog about shifting how we pray about tough things that happen to us. I'm a person of faith, and my entire family, faith is a big part of our lives. And that's a foundation in who we are at our core. And so prayer has always been a part of our health journey, both for our own personal health, but also the prayers of our community as a point to rally around us and show support and to undergird our health experience. So for all those years, I had prayed those words over and over again. God, make it stop. God, make it go away. And I read in this blog on how to change the way that you pray, I read those exact words. And the author of this blog was saying, instead of praying those things, and she admitted that she had prayed those things through her own health experience with a chronic illness. And she said that she learned to shift the way that she prayed. And rather than praying that God would make it go away, she said she learned to pray that God would make it count. Because God, in the strange and miraculous way that he sometimes does, causes or allows those things to happen in our lives so that we can, at some point in our lives, offer hope and encouragement to someone else. And so there was more to that blog post, but that was the crux of it for me, was that it transformed not only the way that I prayed about the illness and about all these things, these traumas that had happened in my life, it transformed the very way that I thought about those things. It changed me to my core. And so I started shifting the way that I saw my career and the way that I carried myself in life. And so I started using my story as an outlet to offer hope and encouragement for others by sharing that, hey, I dealt with all of this stuff and I didn't just rub some dirt on it. I didn't just put myself back up on the horse and start riding again. I just transformed the way that I thought about it. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I don't have it all together. I haven't fixed all the scars in my heart and in my soul. I have a therapist for that. And I love that on this show, y'all repeatedly encourage patients to seek therapy. And I can say that the therapy that I'm still undergoing for my traumas with Crohn's has been just tremendously helpful for me, but it's an ongoing process. There is not a finality to therapy with a lifelong illness because there is not a finality to this disease. It exists for the rest of our life. And so the therapy is going to exist for the rest of my life because I will endure new traumas as I continue to live with this disease until I die. And so just the simple mind shift to make it count has helped me to see that one of those answers to that question of why that 12-year-old suicidal kid had, I take that back. I guess I wasn't 12 at that time. I was a sophomore in high school, so I was probably 14, maybe 15. But that really exhausted kid asked that question, why me? And didn't understand. And I hated God. I literally, in that moment, I hated God for allowing me to be sick. And I had always wondered what the answer to that question was. And I'm actually an ordained minister. I spent more than 20 years in vocational ministry. And so I know a fair bit about theology and about the Bible. And I've never been able to answer my own questions effectively because this issue with a lifelong illness is a very complex trouble. And even though it's been at times very difficult for me to wrap my mind around it, I'm confident that God has a plan for my life, even though sometimes I may not be able to see it because of my own selfishness and because of my own limitations and my own limited view. But I'm confident that one day I will be fully healed because I trust that the Bible says that in heaven there is no suffering, there is no tears, and there's no pain. And so I know that one day when I stand before God in heaven, I know that I'm going to be healed. So that gives me hope. But the other thing that gives me hope in this existence here on this earth is that I know that there are organizations like the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation and so many more that offer support and research and innovation for new therapies and treatments. You know, like we've said multiple times on the episode already, you know, light years of change has come in just, you know, the recent decades. And if you had told me back when I was that 14, 15-year-old kid that there was going to be hope for better treatments, man, that would have drastically changed my outlook on life because I was looking at a lifetime of suffering. And that was so crippling to me as someone who should have been living a life of joy and celebration. And, you know, there's something about adolescence that we almost, you know, we live like there is no tomorrow. I mean, it's just, you know, just blazing. It's just constant go, 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 go. And there's no fear of death because death is not around the corner for an adolescent. But death was always around the corner for me. It was always staring me in the face. And I knew that it likely wasn't going to be one traumatic health incident that just made me instantly die. But it was more than likely going to be something that would slowly wear away at my body until my body just gave up. And that was very sobering as a 15-year-old kid, 14-year-old kid to realize that my death wasn't going to be swift. It was going to be slow and it was going to be painful. But if I had known back then that there would be biologic treatments and that there would be wearable wristbands one day that would detect biomarkers and inflammation markers in your sweat and be able to automatically communicate with your doctor that you need to increase inflammatory medications or shift treatments. I mean, that type of stuff would have been, it would have been mind-boggling back then, but it would have also seriously transformed how I viewed myself and how I viewed my illness. And so, the best thing that patients today have, if they will look for those sources of hope, is that there is a very good reality that in the next decade, 2 decades, however long, in the very near future, not only will we have better treatments that are available, but there's a good chance that we will have technologies that are able to alter our DNA in such a way, or biologic treatments that will be manufactured in such a way that they are highly personalized and will be able to achieve permanent remission, effective permanent remission with very little to no body resistance. That's tremendously hope-giving to know that. And so what I've told so many patients and families over the many years as I've gotten to know hundreds and maybe even thousands of families, that, number one, don't trust Dr. Google, because Dr. Google gives a lot of bad news. There's a lot of bad mumbo jumbo coming from Dr. Google. But if you will go to the reliable sources of research and development on current treatments and future treatments for Crohn's and colitis, you will find that the sky looks so much brighter than you thought it did. So trust your doctor and trust that the future is coming and that there is hope for a brighter day.
That is a really lovely way to bring that around. I'm curious about this one, and you don't have to answer this, but one of the things that we love to make fun of on this show is trite comments that people like to make to people living with chronic illnesses. And so as a man of faith and as a man in the faith community, I'm guessing that you have heard a lot of, and people have told you a lot of, God doesn't give you anything you can't handle. And I'm sure you've had people come to you with their whole, you can take that and shine it up real nice and shove it to Sunday. So when people have either said this to you or when people have come to you to say that this is what people are telling me, I'm curious how you guide them when that is not something you want to hear, because you're like, then God can stop because I've reached the limit of what I can handle.
Right. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've definitely had those conversations with God many times to say, hey, God, that's enough weight right now. I've got enough on me. So the answer to that question is kind of twofold, because the reality is when some people offer those trite little statements, they're really not looking for the truth. I understand that in most cases, they're genuinely wanting to offer hope, even though it might not in reality be that way. So in most cases, I just kind of smile and acknowledge and say thank you and then go on. But if they really want to know the truth, first of all, the Bible doesn't say that. That has been twisted from scriptures that talk about temptation, that God will give you the ability to withstand that temptation. But the Bible does not say anything about God equipping you to handle everything. It just doesn't say that. And so the theology of God is not that you can handle it on your own, but that God will be with you as you go through it. So it's the comfort and the knowledge that you are not alone in the trauma. You are not alone through the hurt and the pain and the perceived aloneness. And I can tell you, I've had many times in my life where I've thought I was alone. But the reality for people of faith is that you are never alone because God is always there. And so when people offer that to me, if they really want to know, like if they're searching for the truth in that statement, I want them to know that I'm not going to be able handle all this. No human can endure the hell of living with Crohn's disease that is severe, that is fistulizing, that is stricturing. It is, in some ways, now I'm biased. I admit that. It is one of the worst illnesses that a person can live with because it is continually chipping away at your physical well-being, your mental well-being. I mean, it erodes at your soul. And, one of the greatest things that y'all do here on this show is that y'all emphasize the need not just for physical care and maintenance of Crohn's disease, but also the mental side of this, because there is a massive mental component to this. And patients that, especially that lean towards the severe side, that are not in therapy, I would encourage them over and over and over again to seek therapy, because before I did, I continued to bear that weight myself, and it was crushing. And what I've learned through recent therapy, my therapist actually said to me last week, "You have bottled this inside for far too long, and what you store inside your body affects your body." And so we are now teaching me through therapy to uncork the bottle and to let it out. And sometimes that spews, like when you shake a Coke and then pop that out, or, you pop the cork on a champagne bottle. Sometimes that can get messy. But for the first time in my life, 2 weeks ago at therapy, I had a person tell me that it was okay to get pissed off about this disease. It was okay to scream and to cuss and to yell and to cry and to vent, because I've taught myself, I've learned through culture, maybe even through male culture, to keep this in and to bottle it up. And over 40 years of living with this disease, that mindset of not talking about it has become more and more toxic to me. And there's no doubt that it has had a downward spiral effect on my own health with Crohn's disease. In fact, just today, I was listening to the episode, I forget the name, the psychologist.
Meredith Craven.
Yes. And she was talking about the mind-gut connection. And I've known that for 40 years, and she was saying, that our research has known that since way back, I think she said into like the 70s. It's a reality, but there's not always been a ton of scientific evidence to that point to really substantiate that. But we're learning more and more about that mind-gut connection now. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt, as proof in the pudding, that when I allow myself to perpetuate the negative and to reside in that negative space, it affects my gut health. And when I choose to live in the mindset of make it count, to live above the trauma and to share the hope with others and then enjoy the benefits of that mindset, it is purifying, it is cleansing, it is healing and hopeful. And so much of what we endure as IBD patients, it is attached to our soul as much as it is to our physical body. The good news that I believe, because of what the Bible teaches, is that my physical body is temporary. And that is encouraging to me because I hate my physical body. So I am looking forward to the day when I can throw this body away and be fully and completely healed in a way that only comes through divine intervention.
Similar to you, I started therapy right around the time that we started airing episodes of this show. So like everybody who has been listening to this show, if you've been listening since the beginning, you have basically followed me on my therapy journey. And you've known me for quite a while, Derek. We've known each other for
about 10 years.
More than 10 years now,
Yeah,
I think.
Actually true, yes.
So I'm one of those people that powers through, and when I am at a point where I actually have to admit that I'm not feeling well, or like that my IBD is getting the best of me, I, up until recently, have been very careful not to talk about it too much. I'm just like, I'm not feeling well, or I'm tired, or just one or two statements, not to I don't want to give it too much airtime is the best way that I can say it. I don't want to give it too much power. I don't want to put too many words behind it because then it gives the Crohn's too much power. I'm giving it a voice. So I previously didn't like to talk about it because when I talked about it, I had to admit that I wasn't feeling well. I had to admit that something was wrong. I had to admit that, things weren't going well. And then people would ask me about it. So then it was like this cycle. So then I say I'm not well and then people are asking me about it. And so then it's like, are you better? Well, no, I'm not better. I have a chronic illness that there is no cure for. I'm never going to get better. All these other times I wasn't feeling well either. It was just, I was feeling okay enough to where I didn't have to admit that I wasn't great. So when you are talking about it, when you are admitting you have trauma, you have pain, you're not feeling well, do you or have you found that for yourself as a person of faith, as a man in all of this, kind of the opposite of me, do you find yourself in that same space of admitting when you're not well, of talking about it, of giving it a voice, of going down that spiral like I do? Because even now, even in therapy, even after 2 years, sometimes, especially on this show, I had to tell Alicia, like, we can't record for a while because I cannot talk about IBD for a while. Like I can't record because I can't talk about IBD anymore. Right. What is your experience when you do start sharing more about, especially now that you're in therapy again, like what are you finding that it's difficult? Are you finding that you're struggling with that?
That's a great question. I don't know that I have a clear answer to that, but I'll give a muddled answer. How about that? All of what you said was relatable. And Robin, you understand as a patient who lives with this disease every single day, let's be real here. This disease is muddled. There's nothing clear or concise about this disease. Y'all have said multiple times on this show, if you've met one person with Crohn's, you've met one person with Crohn's. The differences in the spectrum of disease activity and symptom presentation and treatments, I mean, everything is different for every single patient. There may be some overlap here and there. There may be some similarities, but everything is different. So your muddled question and my muddled answer is a true reflection of this disease path that we are on. And yes, I'm choosing the word path intentionally because I know we laugh about that word journey that we both just kind of retch at. And so yeah, the reality for me has been that sometimes I have a tendency to overshare, at least with the people in my closest circle. Y'all have said on the show several times, Robin, that in your family with your girls, that there's just a lot of poop jokes going around. And in this community, we just understand that poop jokes are going to be the norm because that is our life. That is what we face. And that is our reality 24/7. So sometimes I can actually get hyper-focused on sharing about my disease, and I can nitpick and pull apart every little nuance to the point that sometimes sharing about it and talking about it can be counterintuitive and actually have a negative impact on me because I've never even considered myself a hypochondriac. I mean, a hypochondriac is always inventing new illnesses that they could possibly have. The reality is I have an illness, so I am not being dramatic to say I'm sick. But what I can kind of lose sight of is that I can get hyper-focused on every little twinge and tick in my body and wonder if that's Crohn's related or malnutrition related. In some of my reality in, the past 10 years or so, in some very distinct shifts in my disease course. So I've had 4 small bowel resections, and I've lived a year with a temporary loop ileostomy, which we could talk about for another hour for the trauma, but we've had lots of other ostomy conversations on this, so we won't beat that into the ground because you've had other amazing conversations about that. But malnutrition for me in particular over the last few years of my disease experience has legitimately begun to affect my body in a negative way. The thing that comes to top of mind very easily is with potassium. My body just has a struggle bus of a time absorbing potassium, maintaining potassium, and that has had several negative effects on different organs in my body, primarily my heart. I've been hospitalized many times for having toxically low levels of potassium. I once had to drive myself to the ER in Fort Worth an hour and a half while on the verge of a heart attack because my GI office called me and said, we got your lab work back and you are severely low, not just low, but severely low. You come to the hospital now. And I had actually already been to the hospital in our local ER here, and they told me that I didn't have a problem. The little small town hospital missed what my doctor fortunately was able to see. And so my local hospital here released me. And when I called my GI and said, hey, they sent me home, what do you want me to do? Because I knew that them dismissing me, discharging me was not the right thing. And I tried to fight it, but they basically booted me out on the street. And so I called my GI and she said, are you capable of driving yourself right now? I said, yeah, probably so. So she said, I want you to drive here as fast as you can. Don't break the law, but you get here as quickly as you can. I will call the ER and let them know that you are coming. And literally with maybe 3 miles to go for me to get to Texas Health Harris in Fort Worth, downtown Fort Worth, I felt my heart pounding in my chest because my potassium was so low and my heartbeat was irregular. And I, in that moment, considered pulling over and calling 911, but I was literally only 3 minutes away from the hospital. And so I decided to press on and just pray that I didn't pass out or have a heart attack. Unfortunately, everything was, was good enough. It wasn't fine, but I got myself to the hospital and then spent a week in the hospital only getting IV potassium. And it took an entire week for IV potassium to catch my body up to a healthy maintenance level of potassium. And things like that have happened to me primarily because I've had so much of my intestine removed. We think about 120 centimeters altogether, mostly of my small intestine and a little bit, about a third of my colon is gone. And so I have developed a lot of malnutrition related issues that as I've gotten older, I'm 51 years old now. And as I've gotten older, those malnutrition effects on my body are harder for me to deal with and to compensate for. I've figured out that I take somewhere around $200 to $250 worth of supplements daily to compensate for things that my body can't absorb and can't produce, just to try and help me catch up. And those things aren't covered by insurance because they are supplemental, but yet they are a direct impact of my disease and of my surgical journey, my path. And so my body needs those things to stay alive. I take oral potassium every single day, and that actually is prescription. So it is covered by insurance. But I take a ton of things that are not covered by insurance because insurance doesn't care whether I live or die. They just care about what check boxes they get to say is my treatment or not.
This is wild, man. Whenever I think about telling my doctors I don't want to take any more medications, I'm on so many medications. And then I start thinking about the medications that I'm actually on. I'm on prescription folic acid. I'm on prescription vitamin D. I'm on prescription iron. I'm on prescription vitamin B. That's actually not like medication. That's vitamins and minerals.
Right.
So I'm like, wait, it's a little bit better. Now, thank you so much for coming on the show, Derek.
Thank you for having me.
We really appreciate it. And I think that this episode is going to be very helpful to a lot of listeners. Thank you for being so vulnerable with us, but it is time for us to ask you the last question. So after everything that you've shared, what is the one thing that you want the IBD community to know?
I want patients in particular to know that their life matters. My journey journey has taught me and is continuing to teach me. Like I said, I have not arrived. I haven't figured it all out, because just as soon as I think I've figured this disease out as it impacts my life, it throws me another curveball. And so this disease and how I deal with it, how I process it in my mind and in my heart and in my soul, it changes all the time. But the biggest struggle that I have endured with all this has been in my soul. And so much of my journey has been dragged through the mud with thoughts of my life being worthless or pointless. And so I know that there are other patients out there that think those same things. I've actually had other conversations with patients who were at the time suicidal and wanted to end their life. And through the grace of God and maybe something that I said, I helped them hopefully to understand that their life did have purpose and meaning. And that's exactly it. They are not a waste of space. They are not a burden to their family. They are not trouble. They are valuable. They are precious. Their life has purpose and it has meaning. And if no one has ever told them that before, I want them to hear it through the speaker in their car or their earbuds or however they're listening right now. I want them to know that your life matters. You are not junk. You are not a mistake. You are important. Don't give up.
Oh, damn it. Now I'm crying again.
I was just about to say the exact same thing.
Derek, that's super lovely. And I think there are people that are going to need to hear it.
Yes.
I need to hear it.
Agreed.
I have to tell myself those things repeatedly, even through therapy. Therapy can be traumatic as you talk about these things and as you rip that Band-Aid off.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we are imperfect as humans. We just are. And so even if we are trying to live in the most perfect way that we possibly can, we're still going to screw it up because we are flawed. And so I think that one of the greatest struggles in this world today is that so many people go through life thinking that their life is a joke or that it is a waste. And the truth is, again, y'all know me, I'm a person of faith. My kind of go-to is a verse that says that we are God's masterpiece. And I don't take that lightly. I take that as very hopeful. And, you know, that word masterpiece actually comes from the Greek word poema that we get the word poem from. And it literally means a work of art. And God crafts us in such a way that we are a masterpiece crafted by a master craftsman with purpose and intention and design. And if people are going to relate to that, they need to understand that they are a masterpiece, that they are worthy, that they are valuable, and that they are important because God made them that way.
I don't know. I guess as you were saying that, I was just thinking to myself that some of the greatest masterpieces they're now finding out through technology that they've been painted upon and painted upon and painted upon. So sometimes the masterpiece has layers. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. Derek, it's always wonderful to talk to you, but especially for this.
Yes.
And so making us cry and laugh and all the things in between. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you so, so much. Thank you everybody else for listening as well. We would not be here without you guys listening. And so cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
Hi, this is Derek. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and share it with your friends.